I like to call myself a speech and hearing scientist. I'm interested in many aspects of speech and hearing, but mostly to do with the psychology of them and how people function in terms of their speaking and hearing. So over the years, I've worked in a wide variety of areas, including studying people who have hearing impairments. So in fact, I first came to London to work on a project involved with cochlear implants, something a bit like a bionic ear, in which people who've lost their hearing can have electrodes implanted into their ears, and by stimulating those electrodes, you can get the hearing nerve to fire again, and then they can hear something. Of course, it's not like normal hearing, but it turns out to have worked really much better than anybody had supposed it would. And in fact, that really leads very clearly into one of the important themes of our exhibit, which is to do with the fact that when we're communicating by speech, the typical situation is to have noise of different degrees going on in the background. That could be traffic noise, it could be the noise from music being piped in a restaurant, say, or it could simply be the noise of other people talking. Well, it turns out that if you have normal hearing and you're a native speaker of the language you're operating in, and you're sort of in your 20s, you can really deal extremely well with lots of that background noise and still communicate effectively, even though, obviously, if the noise gets intense enough, you're going to start having trouble. But for many people, even moderate amounts of noise can cause a great deal of problems in communication. So people with any kind of hearing impairment are much more affected by noise. People with cochlear implants, which I started talking about, are really extremely affected by noise, even just little bits of noise. It looks like young children are more distracted by background noises, and there's also some evidence that as people get older and get into their 70s and 80s, that they're also more affected by background noise. So this is the kind of subject, an area in which affects us really all through our lives, because we're intensely social animals, and the way we interact with each other is primarily through speech. So one of the problems we're having in our exhibit is trying to keep it narrowed down to a reasonable number of activities, because in fact there are so many aspects of this area. One thing we're going to be looking at, be able to show, is how you can measure someone's brain waves while they're listening to a sound, and how that can be affected by noise. So you'll actually see somebody sitting there with electrodes placed on the top of their head, and you'll see the wave being measured coming up gradually over the course of time. We're also really keen to give people the experience of what it would be like, for example, to listen to speech with a serious hearing impairment, or using a cochlear implant. So we've got a kind of spot the difference game in which two people will work together, and one of them will be hearing the speech processed in a way to make it sound as if it was from someone using a cochlear implant, so much more difficult to understand. It turns out in that situation, not only is it more difficult for the person listening, but what's interesting is the person then talking will often adapt their speech to try to make it easier for the person having difficulty. So again, this is the idea that we're very social animals, so we're constantly judging the needs of the people we're talking to. And if they're doing well, we can sort of be a bit more lackadaisical about the way we speak, we can speak more rapidly. But if they're having trouble, we try to do things to make it easier for them to understand us. We've got some other kind of games in which you'll be able to hear speech in different levels of noise and different kinds of noise, and see how well you can hear different words. We're going to have some really interesting demonstrations where you're going to try to be listening to people who have very different accents. So I think many of us have had the experience, if you're listening to someone, for example, if you're not from Glasgow and you're trying to understand somebody from them, the accent can really make it difficult. So we're going to try to show how that affects people's abilities as well.